Welcome to the Becoming Evergreen Podcast, a podcast for leaders who long to grow deeply, live purposefully, and lead from a place of rest. I'm Carissa Fleming.
And I am Debbie Burnett, and we are your hosts. Our goal is to create spaces where leaders can thrive in any season, rooted, resilient, and becoming evergreen.
Welcome. Just keep going. Welcome to the Becoming Evergreen Podcast. We are here together today in person and so excited to be doing this in person with you today, Debbie.
Oh, this is such a rare treat. As you might notice, we're always on split screen,
Yes.
which means we're not in person.
Yes. So we are talking about community, and we felt like it was perfect for us to do it together. So we're in Orange County. It is 75 degrees. We're actually supposed to get some rain tomorrow, but I'm super excited to be sitting outside and talking about community because this is actually one of my favorite things. It's to sit outside and hang out and relax with people that I care about. And so talking about community today, we're going to talk about what are healthy relationships, how to find and build growth-minded people for your inner circle, and what are barriers to growing community. And so, as always, we look at our model of Jesus Christ. And John 15:15 says, "No longer do I call you servants, for the servant does not know what his master is doing, but I have called you friends. For all that I have heard from my Father, I have made known to you." And I think that just that idea of remembering that we are actually modeling our relationships after our relationship with Jesus Christ. We're trying to grow closer to Him. And in all that we're doing in terms of building community, the purpose is actually to grow as individuals and to grow in our relationship with Jesus. And so finding the right people that help you do that is super important. So Debbie, talking about healthy relationships, can you talk to me about what are healthy relationships?
Yeah. Well, and one of the analogies I love for this, which is like basically this is what it's not, is if you think about a vending machine where you're putting in money and trying to get something out, the idea of like somebody who's always coming up to you and wanting something from you. That's like, you don't want friends that are basically on the street like a vending machine where your main goal is to only meet their needs. Like you want these give and take relationships. And so as I say that, you might be thinking of particular examples or experiences you've had. And obviously we have different situations where you're ministering to people. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about like your day in, day out friendships with people you do life with. And then there's seasons sometimes where you might be in a really big need situation. That's not, there's seasons where you might need more, but you also are a give and take healthy person. So what we're looking for is we want people who are going to give and take, that they are going to be willing to see you for who you are and be vulnerable themselves. They're going to be willing to ask you questions. I know we're not talking about dating, but I was thinking about like those first date stories where you get to know someone and you're like, they didn't ask any questions. And you think about those examples and you're like, that was a bit of a red flag. So you want to find people who are curious to get to know you. And I was thinking about proximity. Like proximity matters because there is, if you're always flying from New York to California to talk to your best friend, you've got those long-term friendships that you keep, but you also need your day-to-day people in proximity that are doing life with you. And then you also really want to be intentional, that they don't just happen. You want people who will be intentional with you or vice versa. And then also we've talked about this, of course, giving and taking, but also just being vulnerable. You got to be yourself. So for you, I just named off a bunch of things. Now, how are some of the ways you've seen that play out? We talked about risk. We talked about proximity. What are some of the big things?
And finding relationships or in building relationships or kind of all of the above?
All the above. Like what have been some key things out of that you've noticed recently?
I recently moved and I got married about 3 years ago and moved on to a new street. And, what's really exciting to me and encouraging to me is just knowing God's hand of provision and protection, even over where I moved. And I'm on the street with some really incredible people and I've made friends with my neighbors. And it's really exciting to just be able to be in a community. But that required risk. It required time. It required intention. And so I just think about the seasons of life and where I've found community. It's been different places depending on my life season. I've definitely made some good friends just showing up to preschool and walking my kids to preschool, and have made some really wonderful friends doing that. I've made some really wonderful friends going to Bible study. I've moved numerous times, and even just living in certain areas for short periods of time, some of the best friends I've made over my life have been showing up. So taking risk, showing up to something that maybe is uncomfortable, like a women's Bible study, maybe something that's super uncomfortable to you. But it's actually been one of the ways that I've made friends. And I think that there's an element within that too of listening to the Lord. I have a couple friends who've told me, I felt the Lord's, I'm thinking of one friend in particular who said, I felt the Lord push you on my heart. And she prayed about that relationship. And then she sought me out, and she has been like a sister to me and has been there for me in so many different ways. And I'm so grateful for her. So, actually, sometimes there's an element of listening to the Holy Spirit there too. So,
Well, and I was just thinking about the joke that you was telling me that I decided I was going to be your friend.
yes, she did.
And so that example was not me. That was a different wonderful friend of hers. But I was thinking, like, I have no idea what it was back then, other than I remember meeting you and thinking, I want to be your friend. And I was on this floor of amazing women. And it was like, I think the year I kind of honed in on my friendships. I've done some trial and error. And I think that happens in college where you kind of funnel into like, who am I? And I really kind of dialed it. Anyway, so I think I decided to be your friend. Luckily, you reciprocated. Otherwise, that might have been really awkward.
How could
Look
I
at
not?
us now. How could I not? Yeah. Okay, so I'm thinking about the different types of friendships. We talked about Jesus giving an example of us being his friend, but also how do you like modeling that? We're going to talk about inner circle, but I'm also thinking about he had kind of his broader sphere. So he had his 12 that he traveled with. So it's like kind of inner three, and then he had his 12 that he traveled with. And then they talked about the 72 that were part of the missional team that went out and shared the gospel. They talked about his disciples, which I think was broader community people that followed him. And then there's the crowds. Obviously, our life might look different than his, but there's some lessons to be learned from that about the different types of friendships. Yeah, what would you say as far as the different types of levels of friendships and depth?
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely heard it talked about where there's like a ring where you have an inner circle, and you might have two or three people in that inner circle. And then beyond that, you have friends, maybe confidants, but there's a little bit less give and take. I mean, you don't go quite as deep, and they're in that next ring. And then you've got acquaintances, and that ring can be much bigger and broader. And so when I think about, we actually need people in each one of those zones. And I think, again, like we said, there's different seasons where certain people may go in and out of some of those different areas within your circle. And that can be hard. That can be difficult. Sometimes when they leave that inner circle, oh my gosh, that can leave you feeling super vulnerable. And so taking a risk and being vulnerable again can be difficult. So what are some areas that you've had to be vulnerable in finding friendships?
Yeah, I think some of it is the vulnerability of showing up and starting. So that was one of the first ones I thought of. I was remembering a time when I had just moved of a church plant team, and I needed friends, but I also was kind of in this like very busy season of church planting. And so a friend had recommended, you should go to this gathering. They're having a dinner party. And I was feeling so much anxiety about going. And I'm typically pretty confident, but I realized part of what makes me confident to risk is I usually know like one or two people. And there's a context where I didn't necessarily have an anchor of like, hey, they know me. We're good. It's like, oh, I have a contact I'm texting that I've never met. I chickened out. I'm going to be totally vulnerable with you. I totally didn't go.
Which is super surprising to me.
She was surprised.
She's very outgoing, and I don't think I've ever seen you chicken out of things like that.
Yeah, but I realized that was just an even further layer because of the lack of even just one anchor person. But later I met those people, and they became part of our small group community and, young adults or adults, life groups and stuff like that. And so that was the thing where I felt the risk of like just putting yourself out there. To show up. And I don't know if any of you feel like that when you're even going to a church or going to a small group. There might be moments where you're like, nobody knows me yet. And to show up where you're not known yet, risking on people knowing you. Yeah. And what do you think? Yeah.
Well, I just am thinking about so many times we do show up and we're just waiting for somebody to invite us in. And there's whole church volunteer teams, greeter teams, those types of things that are set up to try and preempt the difficulties that come with that. But actually, in order for you to get connected, you still have to be willing to shake their hand and say, hi, I'm new.
Yeah.
Right. Which if you don't do that, it can be actually very hard to get involved. And I also want to say that, again, when we talked about Jesus's relationships, we missed the most important relationship. It's
Thank
really,
you for correcting us.
well, I don't know. We missed the relationship he had with his heavenly Father.
Yeah.
And that is the primary relationship we see over and over again. When he's 12, he goes to the temple because he had to be with his Father. In ministry, he pulled aside. He went off to pray in the early morning hours. He took time on boats. He left his disciples behind at times to build this relationship with his heavenly Father, because out of that relationship, he was able to actually to help grow his team, to grow his group of people.
Yeah.
So I just don't want to
Miss
forget that. Yeah.
Well, it's back to the two most important commandments where we talk about love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. There's this both of those are so key. And so I heard this phrase of like, I'm going to love other people to the extent that I know I'm loved. And so being reminded that if we talk about risk, if there is a full tank of no, I am loved from the Lord, which I'm saying this as like, I have been probably working on that my whole life. I'm going to be able to risk well and love well because I'm showing up knowing I'm loved. And that's not always part of our story. We might have hard, origin stories or things you've experienced where it's hard to risk because you've experienced hurt and loss. And so that brings me to my next question. Like, what are some of the barriers as we're trying to be intentional with both our inner circle and all those layers? What do we run into?
Yeah. And just like before we move on, you have a quote down from John Townsend.
Oh, thank you.
And we cannot be fully loved until we are fully known. And I do think that there is an element of being ready. Actually, this could be one of the barriers, but being ready to step out into community. You kind of have to be in a place where you're ready for growth. And when we talk about community, we can have lots of wonderful friends, but actually there is a space for intentional community. There's a space for intentional growth in life, in leadership. And we might have some fantastic people in our lives, but they may not be the friends that actually like propel us forward. We've talked about this even with habits of, finding that trainer or finding that person who's really good with money to help us make those steps forward. And so we're talking a little bit about building friendships. We're talking about building relationships, but we're also talking about building community. And so when I think about some of those barriers, chemistry is one of those things. I think that's been one of the fun things is it's hard to have a relationship with somebody that you actually don't really like. It's a good thing.
That's a great point. Good people like me. Otherwise we'd be toast. No. We wouldn't be here.
We wouldn't
probably at IKEA on a Saturday. I don't know.
Yeah. No, it really does help to have that kind of just interpersonal chemistry. And so actually part of that is like being yourself a little bit and being vulnerable about who you are, because we all, can be quirky. We all have differences. Not all of us are the same. We come from different cultures and different communities. And so you might move into a location where you might be coming in and you may not understand the culture, or you might have moved from one part of the county to the other part of the county and it feels different. And so learning how to adapt and just be yourself matters. And then we've talked about this a little bit, but being vulnerable, that can be a barrier to community. Also, trying to find community in unhealthy places. You have any thoughts on that?
Well, I think in the unhealthy places, it might be friends that don't bring out the best in us. Or like, I just remember some of the process I went through in early college it wasn't just finding cool people. It was like finding friends who brought out the best in me. Not that they were perfect, and I think some of the things that I noticed that I was like, oh, these are not the best. And I kept trying to get my needs met is like, there was some cattiness, some hookiness, and offense without talking it through, and all things that are kind of normal as you're a 19 or 20 something person. But that's why, like when I met Carissa in that year that we had on the floor, it felt like, oh, these aren't perfect people, but these are healthy people.
Yes.
And so I think that's the difference, is that it's like you kind of feel like you're spinning wheels and then you feel more insecure. So spinning wheels. It's not a fun process. What were you thinking?
I was thinking actually about, I had this opportunity where I've talked about this over the past number of podcasts, but I transferred colleges. I was a college volleyball player, and I showed up on this campus, really relatively unknown, had picked this campus because I was really trying to deepen my relationship with the Lord and learn more about him. And I walked onto this volleyball team, And we did this practice where we got together, we prayed before games, and we had a goal for each one of our games. We had things we talked about. So we were actually going in the same direction. And so kind of having some goals set made a big difference. And then we had a team verse, which I know it sounds, as an 18, 19-year-old, I had not experienced that kind of directional um, within the context of sports of like, yeah, we obviously want to win the game and you might want to win the season or you might want to, whatever your goal is for what it is you're doing, but having people who are actually all melted together, going in the same direction and cheering each other on, being willing to support you when you're feeling low. And if you've ever watched a volleyball game, it is super, you can actually look at a team that's winning versus a team that's losing and see the difference in how they're communicating with each other and just encouraging each other. So I was just thinking about that experience. And the same goes with building community when you are not going the same direction as people in your life. That can be a huge barrier to building community. I've definitely had seasons where there's been people who have been really, really wonderful for that particular season. But when I kind of step back and am I actually wanting to go in that direction? What do their fruit look like? What are they doing on their weekends? How do they talk to their kids? How do they talk about the people in their life that matter? Are we kind of going in the same direction?
Well, I think what you said just reminded me, we've talked a lot about our goal is to orient our lives around Christ and who he is. And so the opposite and cultural norm is often to orient our lives around ourselves. The beauty of that, where you're oriented around a shared goal and shared vision, is you're kind of running together after this shared vision and spurring each other on. That is really life-giving. And how much angst does that save you from if each of us are oriented our lives around ourselves and then trying to run after a goal together? It's clunky.
Yeah.
But as we orient ourselves imperfectly, because none of us are on this side of heaven going to do it perfectly, but as we're trying to orient our lives around Christ, it actually helps the way we even run after that growth together. Because our growth is to run after Christ, and that actually unifies us with each other, which is really cool, because that's also a picture of the church. And then we're talking about the inner circle. You're still going to have your village. You're still going to have other people that aren't on the same page. And there's the beauty in that diversity. But when you're talking about your inner circle, you want to pick people who are running after that same thing together. And that's going to help cut out. We talked about unconditional love. I'm going to butcher the verse, but basically it's covering over a multitude of sins, in the sense that I think when we're running after something together, all of the imperfectness of us becomes less loud, I think, or less forefront. And the thing we're running after is the bigger thing. So obviously it's really lofty what I just said, but what could that look like to cultivate that inner circle intentionally? What has that looked like for you in different seasons?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question. And that's actually one of the reasons why we're here and one of the reasons we started Becoming Evergreen. So in building becoming evergreen, one of the things I recognized in my own life is that in particular seasons, going through difficult things, it has been incredibly valuable actually choosing a group of people. Most of the time, I've done this a couple different times where I've chosen a group to be a part of an actually intentional growth community so that I could achieve some personal goals. So I could achieve some career goals and some of those types of things. And actually, so I didn't make the same mistakes in some of my previous like I did in my previous relationships. And so we've actually both been a part of these Townsend Leadership Program growth groups. And I would say that is actually the catalyst for us deciding, okay, what does this look like in day-to-day life? How do we do this? And how do we do this as believers? And so we've talked a little bit about being vulnerable, and that's one of the biggest components of these growth groups is actually learning how to be vulnerable and how to be safe. And so coming into a growth community, there's certain things that you agree to be in order to make sure that everybody feels that level of safety that they need to be vulnerable. But can you talk about what that means to be vulnerable?
Yeah, I think about that in both contexts where it's really structured, like you were just talking about, but you're also choosing to jump into something where there's also a safe person who's kind of facilitating. You might have those conversations where you're kind of diving off the deep end with these people you just met. And usually it starts with telling your story. And so you were trusting these strangers with your story, and you have no idea their context or how they're going to receive it. You know, okay, if I'm going to be vulnerable, and this is a very specific situation, you probably wouldn't
Yes.
start off with someone in the grocery store with this. That might freak them out. But in that context, you've got structure to share your story, which helps then because any other thing you share about your day to day, after that, it's a lot of checking in about your goals and that kind of thing. They have the context of your story, which helps. And so, one of the first things with risk is the vulnerability of sharing kind of who you are in your story and showing up, which you might have hard things, you might have pain, you might have your own mistakes in your story. And again, those need to be safe people, which those safe people are people who can let you be yourself, who, aren't vending machine friends. And then the other ways that you can risk, I think, are even around continue. Like one of the things I've noticed about myself is that it's really easy for me to share about something hard in hindsight. It's
Mm.
hard for me to share about things, vulnerable things in the moment sometimes. I don't know if this is part of being a 7 on the Enneagram, or in Myers-Briggs, we talk about this too, that I'm very public with my thoughts and ideas, but I'm more private with my emotions. It's sometimes hard for me to let people in while I'm in the middle of needing something. And I think it's because there's things both in me and just us as humans where we don't necessarily want to need people. But if you can think about when you felt really loved, you were vulnerable to ask for help. And letting people help you is sometimes just as vulnerable.
And it's
Yeah.
actually how we bond,
Right.
right? And when you look at
Yeah.
attachment and
Yep.
babies bonding with mothers and touch and how important that vulnerability actually is in forming that bond. So being honest
Yeah.
with your story,
Yeah.
actually being willing to be hurt,
Yeah.
right? That can, especially if you've been hurt, being able to trust people, again, can be really difficult. So again, if you're feeling this and you're not sure how to find the right community, we're going to talk more about that a little bit,
Yeah.
but I think that feel free to reach out. We'd love to talk to you a little bit more. And if you're struggling to find a community that is safe, please reach out. I'd love to talk with you about that. Um, some of my issues is letting go of like perfectionism.
Yeah.
When someone shows up, I know my parents, from a smaller town, and my parents often have people that just show up out of the blue and it's wonderful. And I think that my mom's house is always, just about always really well put together. But I know for me, if that was the case, I would be like, ah. And I do miss that environment, but being willing to show up and not worry about what they think about your house is hard, right? There's that level of perfectionism that can be a barrier to that community, letting go what people think. And uh,
Well, and Brene Brown talks about this a lot in Daring Greatly and a couple other things. And she's, of course, a social researcher that studies people. And these wholehearted people, she found there's a level of comfortability with that
mm,
lack of perfectionism or needing to be certain about things. You're a little bit more okay with the building process of a relationship and the uncertainty. And I think I've joked about I'm a recovering perfectionist as well. So I very much understand that. It's hard to not want to do it right the first time. And that means sometimes with relationships too. Um, well, yeah, where do we want to head next as we kind of think through those structures and the communities and ways to build that?
yeah, I'm just
Let's-
thinking about that perfectionistic perspective of, I was talking to Debbie earlier today about, we're talking about writing and like
Mm.
how my first draft, I would rewrite that first like paragraph and then the second paragraph. And so many times that first in college, right? That first draft was actually like as perfect as it could possibly be. And then rewriting it, obviously, I didn't do that very often. Probably if I was in a writing course, I would have had to do it more.
Yeah.
But sometimes it can actually be a barrier to doing better because you're like, oh, I need to just write everything that I can get it perfect right here. And you're looking at the minutia rather than actually rewriting it later. So I know this is a little bit more about writing, but just that idea of it doesn't have to be perfect. And that actually for it to be better in that relationship, being honest and being vulnerable and
Yeah.
being willing to edit a little bit is not a bad thing.
That's a great analogy about life too. And it's like we see that with relationships.
Mm.
And I think about that moment where I chickened out and like, was there a desire to be perceived a certain way or insecurity? And like we've all done it. We've had those moments of feeling overly self conscious about something. What was underneath that? I don't know. But I also was like a little tired from constantly having to do risky and being put in new situations. So you might need to pace yourself with some of those risks. You might be in season where like, okay, I'm like meeting new people for 5 weeks. I just moved. I just need to call my best friend. Like you're going to need to pause and lean into those relationships.
One of the things that I was thinking about a little bit, you talked about that vending machine analogy.
Yeah.
And I heard this at some point in time. I think one of the pastors, I've actually heard it more than once, but the idea of in that vending machine, putting money in and it's broken and nothing is coming out. And you keep putting money in, expecting to get more out. And I was thinking about some of you might have people in your life right now that you may need to edit out,
Yeah.
which sounds really harsh. And that alone, being afraid to hurt somebody, right? Being afraid of what people might think, kind of going back into that idea,
Yeah.
actually can be a barrier for you finding the right people. I was just reading this book,
Yeah.
Never Go Back by Henry Cloud. And in the book, he talks a little bit about somebody who was continuing to pick this relationship that she was in relationship with somebody that just was like that. Just she kept putting in, she kept giving all this effort and it just wasn't getting out what she needed from the relationship. When she finally made the choice to edit that out, she had space. And then 9 months later, she met and married the person that she, would have been never have met
Yeah.
or been available for if she hadn't edited out that last relationship. So
Yeah.
just thinking about perfectionism or trying to make things work.
Sometimes there are times, and this is another book by Henry Cloud, talks about necessary endings. That's one of the things he talks about, whether it be a job or whether it be people. Well, one of the things that you sort of alluded to is in the perfectionism is sort of this desire to see in a certain way, and also sort of maybe a discomfort with being able to ask for help. I know one of the skills that we've both talked about and worked on is like the ability to ask for the things that you need, and things that help you. And not that every person's going to be able to meet those needs, but the skill and the practice is, all right, what if you need somebody to just be a vent, somebody you can vent to them, or you need encouragement? That's a bit of a skill to learn how to ask what you need. Honestly, for me, it's been just like, being aware of what I need was half the battle. And then figuring out how to ask for it. And sometimes it feels like, do people really do this? Do they just sit and ask of like, Carissa, will you validate me? Feels a little weird, but it's like you start practicing something and then it gets natural and it organically flows. Learning how to ask for what you need. What has been some of the fruit of that?
Yeah, I think what's pretty fun for me right now is being in this season where uh, I feel the freedom, say, with my husband, to say, I really just need you to listen. I just kind of need to vent. And he's learned like, and he's very good. Are you venting right now? Or are you looking for feedback? And so it actually gives me a second to go, oh, I am just venting. I don't really, and then maybe I want your feedback later, or maybe I want your advice later. But that also helps narrow down when you're able to ask for what you need. It can help narrow down and then help those needs get met so you can move on to the next thing. Um, and John Townsend in his book, People Fuel, talks about relational nutrients. We are going to dive more into this next episode as well. But being able to ask for what you need really makes a big difference in being able to cultivate the community. So maybe you found the right people.
Yeah.
Maybe you're like, oh, I showed up, I went to this study, or I joined a group. The next step is actually being able to cultivate the community. And so to stay with it and to stay engaged. And that can be hard too.
Yeah.
Because I think sometimes when you risk and then you are vulnerable, or maybe you're like, you just did a little bit, and maybe you don't get exactly what you want from it back, that can be difficult. So cultivating the relationship.
Yeah.
For cultivation, what would you suggest as a way to do that?
Yeah, I was just thinking about that because I was thinking about, as one of my friends calls it, your ride or die friendships, your friendships that you've had for a long time. Those, for me, often happened in the midst of moves where like those longtime friends, I didn't live near them. So there was intention around shared adventure or planning. But if you're talking about like your inner circle and your day to day, those for me are intentional with time. So one of my love languages is quality time. So one of the things that I feel loved by is if people reach out, or if I do this, I'm, trying to show love to them, is to invite them to go do something. And so some of it's just cultivation, is just time. And with our busy lives, there is some real intentionality. Sometimes in seasons, I'll sit down and go, okay, what are some key friendships for me to invest in? And so it might actually be intentionally thinking it through, or it might be during that week, especially if I'm working from home a lot, I'll go, I know I need to get a couple hikes in, especially on these days. I will reach out and set that up. It takes planning. It actually takes some work. It doesn't just happen. And then I know in different seasons when you're busier or less busy, your capacity might shrink or heighten depending on what's going on. But just making sure you're getting sometimes even when you're the most tired, that's actually when you need the most input from people. You need that fuel from people when you're tired. And sometimes we draw away and are isolating when we should be reaching out to other people. And so that's some of the intentionality is to almost kind of check yourself when you're pulling back. Do I need to be cultivating just time with people? And it doesn't have to look a certain way. And then sometimes the cultivation for me has looked like really intentional structure, like we talked about, where we've got a growth group, or my church had this like 9-month discipleship program. 2 different churches I've been a part of have had that, and one is like soul care, and then the other one was kind of missional living. And so whatever that looks like, there was some intentional structure around that. I've also known people who've like intentionally chosen the life team. They may not all know each other, but you might jot down like, these are the people that I would want to call if my house was on fire, or probably too soon to joke about that. But what if something was wrong? They're the people I would call. And so you take a moment to identify that, and it might be a mix of your spouse and your sister and 3 close friends, or it might be a business coach and your neighbor. Like it might look a little different depending on who you are. Or if you're on a leadership team, you might get other leaders together and form some cohort of people who are in the same boat as you. It may not be your like longtime best friends, but they're people who are willing to grow with you.
I also am just sitting here thinking about some of the people who might be listening. You might have lived a little bit more life, and you might actually have a lot more to give. And so I just want to encourage you. I was thinking about some special people in my life who actually have gone out of their way to be helpers, to show up, uh, to encourage, to mentor. And so I'm thinking a little bit about we're looking for building community, but part of our growth as we're building community is to be able to give back to. And so just a reminder that if you have some of these, it might be, you might be our age, you might be somebody younger and mentoring younger people, but there's still this, I don't know, just thinking about how important it is for people, they all need relationships. So if you're lacking it, or you see people in your life that are lacking it and you have it, please feel free to reach out. Just know that you are wanted, and actually people need you.
Yeah. Well, and that can be some of the insecurity is like, what do I have to give? And then you get next to that person, you're like, wow, they're so delightful to be around. And it's not because you're doing something grand. It's that you've gotten settled into who you are. You've done the work. You've gone through big things. You've gone through hard things. You've gone through moments of quiet, moments of pain. As you've walked through that and stayed faithful, there's things that you just inherently learn. And that as you're shoulder to shoulder with people, we learn from each other. And so that's where I think the enemy can silence people when we, is to sideline us or make us feel like we don't have something to get. Point is, I'm going to learn from every single person I'm around something.
Yes.
But those intentional friendships, you're going to learn from each other and spur each other on to love and good deeds as you grow together.
Yeah.
So as we kind of land our plane here and think through growth, what would be a challenge that you would give to people as they hear all the things we've said?
Yeah.
What would be
it's a
something
lot.
to think about? Yeah. What would be kind of an action step?
Yeah. So I mean, we talked about a few different things. So just going back over what we talked about what are healthy relationships. We talked about how to find and build growth-minded relationships, growth-minded groups, and then what are some of the barriers to doing that, including vulnerability, and actually how do you grow and how do you cultivate those relationships? Just a reminder, like life team qualities, finding people that are safe, finding people who are willing to be honest, growth-oriented people. Uh, and it's okay if you're not super like goal oriented. You can have different ways that you grow, right? It doesn't have to be, you don't have to fit a specific mold personality wise, but just people who are willing to keep moving forward. And then choosing friends that are encouraging and willing to be honest with you, I think are really important aspects to building community.
Well, and take a moment and just look at, again, those people you have and maybe jot down, hey, who would I want to be more intentional with over this next week, over this next season? Who do I want to go deeper with? Are there ways that you can take risks relationally with those safe people. And just, you might say, all right, I'm going to call this person on Thursday and see if they want to go get lunch. Like, just put a couple action steps like that. Let me tell you.
I was going to say, just also, you may not have a specific person in mind. Think about what you might need in this season too. So just writing down, I need somebody that's going to help me learn how to, I don't know, ride the bus. Like if you happen to move to another, I was just thinking about like maybe you move to New York, or I'm going to go to Europe in a little bit, and I'm sitting here thinking, how in the world am I going to get from point A to point B? I need to call somebody up and figure out how to do this now.
Google Maps actually is pretty great these days.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you.
Anyway, sorry.
But it's so much better to do it with a friend.
Yeah.
But taking a moment and thinking about what do I need in this season, and invite the Holy Spirit into this process. Allow him to be the person who guides you initially. And I think that is, again, one of the most exciting things for me in looking back, is seeing the work of the Holy Spirit in my life and providing some of these friendships, even when I didn't know I need them.
Yeah. Well, I just want to close with this thought that we are built and made for connection, that there can be this desire to do things on your own and be Indiana Jones doing this grand adventure. But what we want and what we need is to be in community and doing this in community. And this is what we're made for. And no matter if you're an introvert or extrovert, or you are have 2 close friends, or you have 20, we all need connection. This is what we're made for. And so learning how to do that well, that might be the work of a lifetime.
So stay rooted, stay resilient, keep becoming evergreen.
And thanks for joining us.
Hey, it's Carissa here. Thanks so much for listening. And before we go, I want to tell you about something that I am super excited about. The Fall 2026 Becoming Evergreen Retreat is happening October 23rd through 25th at Mount Hermon Conference Center near Santa Cruz, California, nestled in the Redwoods. It's amazing, and we want you to be there with us. So come, bring your team, your life group, or a friend, and join us in the Redwoods. Register at becomingevergreen.com.